call. Now, this is extremely, like, this is like below the bottom of Feraldo's range. From the undergun spot, like 5-6 suited, he just couldn't let it go.
Sometimes you're playing live poker, you're drinking wine, you just look down at a pretty hand.
I don't know, I'm saying like 6-7 suited would be even closer. 7-8 suited, I think it is.
Zeno with King Jack in the same suit from the cutoff. He's going to call.
I'm not saying like I don't do what Feraldo just done. I'm saying like if I'm in this spot under the gun and it's live poker and having a wee drink of red wine,
then you're going to be playing.
I think I'll be playing the 5-6 of clubs. Yeah. But I'm saying like 1.1. A lot of players wouldn't be.
Gerald with pocket nines in the small blind.
Yeah, this is the kind of hand. He's on the small blind. He doesn't want to go 3 ways, possibly 4 ways to the flop, playing out of trap 1 in every street.
A low percentage of the time.
So I'm going to guess he's going to take the aggressive option.
I like to talk in absolutes.
And either squeeze, call it off, or maybe even just be happy with the pot and jam all in.
Right, okay.
Picking up like close to 20%. Oh, he's went for the flat call.
He's gone for a flat.
Fair enough. I'm saying like, I wouldn't mind.
Is part of that predicated by Zeno's stack size flatting pre? Is he worried that maybe Zeno's laying a trap?
I'm saying like, fair enough, Zeno could be laying a trap here, but I don't think it happens that often.
Okay.
So I think you're only concerned about getting in against Feraldo and getting unlucky, him having a better hand.
Well, Mark does.
I would elect to squeeze and not go 4 ways here, because when he does peel the 9s, it always goes 4 ways, and he's playing out of position 1. He's forced to act in every street.
Mark did get in for the cheap with 4-7. Look at this flop then. So Gerald has his overpair.
Yeah.
Feraldo top 2, and Mark with bottom pair and the open-ended straight draw.
And Anthony had a very good hand, and he flopped.
Have a look at this. It's going to check through.
This is insane.
How was?
Well, Feraldo has to check this flop with his range. I'm saying like because.
This is a stacked table. These are some really good players, and this is a surprising beginning to the hand, Jonathan, when we find 4 players and 3 of them really should like this flop quite a bit, starting with Gerald with 9s. Then we got the 5-6 for Neil Farrell, the opener, and of course Mark MacDonald in the big blind with the pair and the open ender, and yet no money goes in. Let's first talk about Neil Farrell not betting, because that seems to be the most shocking thing. He has the lead. What do you think is going through his head here?
Well, he has top 2, but he's aware he's up against very, very good players. And that means this is just not a board Neil's almost ever going to bet. Maybe literally 0% of the time, 4 ways is he betting this with his under the gun range, because it just does so badly, especially against the big blind, but really against everyone else. Everyone else has got really strong hands compared to Neil's range versus range wise. Not that Neil's losing to everyone or anything like that. Clearly he's ahead here. But he can be put in so many bad spots so often if he chooses to bet. Not this time. But if he's got 2 aces and he bets and Mark MacDonald raises, it's already tough. And so he's just trying to avoid that situation on a meta level, on the overall level. And so he has to check here also to handle that.
Yeah, I think it's a really impressive thing to actually follow through on, because this is a pure GTO board-based play, and he's doing it because he's against these really good players. But man, is it hard to put those fingers on the table and check when you have this hand that's so vulnerable, you know?
Absolutely. Really, really tough.
Now, Zeno, it makes plenty of sense that he's checking. This is a garbage situation for him with King Jack. Should either Gerald or Mark MacDonald have led? And I'll tell you what, we had a long, contentious discussion on our podcast about Gerald.
We sure frickin' did. We ended up just not really ever agreeing on that one either, where I was saying, I think leading is fine for Gerald. With 2 9s here, when it so often is going to check through. You would expect Neil's going to check a lot. I know you're calling it surprising, but I think these players aren't surprised that it checks through. Zeno's the guy who's most likely to bet, probably, if anyone. So I think Gerald could bet. I think better than Gerald betting, though, is Mark MacDonald, where he's got a hand that really seems to scream, bet me right now, please.
Yeah, and I fall on the side of Gerald checking just because I don't want to put in more chips in this situation that's going to be bad, but we don't have to get to that. Let's check out the podcast if you want to hear about that. But Mark MacDonald, I agree, feels like he has a pretty great spot to lead here, where he has a hand that doesn't really fear anything. I mean, he fears 7-8. It sucks if somebody has 7-8.
Sure.
But he blocks the nuts. He can make really strong hands. He has a backdoor flush draw, and he's the guy who's supposed to have these really strong hands. At the same time he has a pair, he wants to protect his equity against overcards. I feel like this is a great time for a lead.
Also, every time he improves his hand, it's going to be a little scary to the table, right? It's either going to be 4 cards to a straight, or there's going to be a paired board. and it may be hard to get action down the line. So, yeah, I really like a lead here from MacDonald for sure.
Yep, but he checks, and I promise there will be action to come. Speaking of action, Nitrogen Sports Poker, Jonathan. It's got action, it's got fun, it's got our monthly tournament.
It sure does. They do not have juggling yet, but they're working on it. But back to that monthly tournament where they guarantee 1,000 buy-ins. That's right, 1,000 buy-ins. We never get more than like 180 people, usually less than that. So there's a massive overlay. That means free money for you, but you have to use the link that we tweet out every so often about Nitrogen to have access to this tournament. Otherwise, you can't even see it. It doesn't even exist for you. You've been like shadow banned. You don't want that. No one wants that.
Yeah, get on Nitrogen, get you some poker.
Well, 4 on the turn gives Mark the lead.
Whoa, this hand's all changed now because now
Gerald's
Gerald.
going to think he's got the best hand.
Gerald's thinking, okay, that 4 could be a good hand,
But
good
we
card.
see Mark is in there, way out in front now.
You didn't even have like Jack deuce of hearts.
It's
you
gonna
had
go-
ace deuce of hearts.
Bet from Gerald, flat call from Mark, and Feraldo might be able to fold. He might be able to find a hero fold here.
We're on the next hand when I had kings. One red one and one black one.
They're one hand away from finding out which other had in that big pot.
The club and a red one.
'Cause what can Mark actually else do here apart from like flat call?
I mean,
Right.
nice
So like,
bluff.
I think Feraldo can find the fold here.
Well,
He's going to be hating life.
I would never. I'm hoping you didn't have ace jack of
There's,
clubs.
like-
I mean, that would be ridiculous. Really?
6-7 offsuit, 6x of hearts.
I don't even.
He
believe that.
blocks one of the 6s. Mark can have all the 4s. He's definitely taking the price.
What did you have?
Gerald can have pocket 8s, pocket 9s.
Right.
This is a
You know you
nasty
want-
spot. This is a spot that doesn't come up that often.
You're just wasting
Like,
time.
this is a hard one to actually figure out what to do,
I'm not even thinking about it.
what is correct. This is why Feraldo's going to be here for
You know,
a
I don't
while.
know.
Well, he's moved to his chips now.
I was going to say, of course, obviously he still
have
has
to think
outs
about it
to
all
a
now.
house.
But the problem is here, he doesn't want to see a deuce, a 3, a 7,
Right.
an 8, or an over card,
Yeah,
because
he's-
if it comes to Jack of Spades, somebody could have Jack Queen of Hearts, and he's counterfeited.
Well,
I'm saying there's
three-way
so
to
many
this
cards.
river.
He needs a 5 or a 6, obviously.
Wow.
Wowza!
Mark then hits runner, quads. Gerald's going to think his hands are near lock.
Well, this is a snap, like slam dunk. Probably, actually, Gerald has to check call for Aldo because he still has bigger overpairs that he
Right.
checks the flop with.
Okay.
But it might just go check.
And does,
Actually, I think it might go check, check, check.
I was going to say, does Mark have the most interesting spot here, whether to bet this or not?
No, I think range-wise, I'm saying like balance-wise, I don't think you can bet it. Because what's he betting with?
Well, that's what I mean, Mark. I think it's the most interesting spot. And again, he can expect Feraldo to jam when check to with those overpairs, right?
Everyone's got to assume a lot of Feraldo's range here is flush draws and overpairs, but
Right.
more likely overpairs.
Well, look at this.
So maybe Gerald's going to put a wee blocker bet, or else he's going to think he's going for good value here.
I would acknowledge it.
And then Mark, of course, will just call here with these quads, try and get Feraldo in.
I don't know about that. I'm saying like maybe it is the best play, and the fact that he's not absolutely last to act, it's not like he's.
I just want the actual hand.
Obviously, if you're last to act and you call, you get punished.
Such a twitch by even knowing what they say. My chance always
Does he?
put away.
Which he shoves it.
Does move all in.
And this is an easy fold for Gerald. Unless he absolutely levels himself, but it's an easy fold. Four, 5 of spades is there. 4, 7 of spades, 4, 8 of spades, 3, 4 of spades. And then you've got the queen, 4 of spades, king, 4 of
Right.
spades. All the 4 of spades is there.
Well, let's put a lot of chips into this pot.
Actually makes it easier for him to fold when he bets so much.
Right. It's just a suicide bluff. If it's a bluff Mark, then it just...
I don't like his. I'm not a big fan of the sizing, to be honest. The 430 on the river, I would have went for like 275 or something. It does the same thing.
Right. Stops yourself getting
And I,
bluffed.
and I actually think it was too thin a value bet for that size.
Well,
We're going to get to MacDonald's decision, but first we need to discuss Gerald's decision on the river because we spent a ton of time on our podcast yet again arguing about this decision that Gerald made here to lead. I really ultimately concluded that I hate this lead. I hate betting this river when we get called in 2 spots on the turn for a couple of reasons. The most obvious of which is that I think it's very hard to get called by a worse hand. I think Mark MacDonald, with Farrell behind him, is folding every worse hand than 2 nines. I think that's pretty clear to me. I think Farrell, maybe we get lucky and he calls with 7s or 8s. Maybe we even get lucky and he folds 10s once in a while. But he's going to make a lot of distribution-based decisions. And when we bet twice, I think it's just losing a ton of money against Farrell.
I think it's extra bad because of the sizing that he chooses, where he bets so big that it's harder to get called by the 7s and the 8s of the world and things like that. If he were to go small, he'd at least have a better chance. So I started making that argument on the podcast. You made a really good counterpoint, which is there's a balance issue there where if you're betting your medium strength hands, you just don't have enough super strong value to balance it with, because it's really quads, 6s full and 5s full are your only strong hands. You're going to want to go really big and polarizing sizing at least sometimes with those, which means we're just going to have too many medium strength hands at 200K if we were to bet that. And so ultimately I came around and agreed with you that probably a check is best, but I don't completely hate a small bet if I wasn't up against such good opponents who can figure all this stuff out.
Right. I think what Gerald was doing here was trying to play the hand in a way that would be easy for him to play. Like, this is an easy bet fold for him, especially when he chooses this sizing. It makes it so his future decisions are quite simple. And that's great. But I think he over prioritized that and didn't think enough about what potential hands could call him, especially that MacDonald really can't call him with a worse hand at all. That's a huge problem. And then you can't get any action there. And then Farrell is clearly going to be calling mostly with hands that are better than 9s. It's a big problem, but it happened.
I mean, the one other thing to keep in mind with this, of course, is that we've never seen Gerald before. If he's got a very aggressive, very bluffy image, he can get called more, and the sizing up may actually help him to get called more by worse hands. But that's not likely based on what we've seen him do and his whole demeanor and everything. It doesn't feel like that. So ultimately, I think this is probably just a mistake.
Yeah, I think this is it's really tough to play poker well, especially at tables like this. And this mistake is not a huge mistake for a lot of players, but for a player like Gerald at a table like this is a huge deal. And I think it's a big mistake.
Fair enough.
Now we get to the fun decision, which is having quads and having somebody bet into you and trying to decide what to do. So Mark has to ask himself, what is more likely? Is Gerald going to call if I shove? Because Neil is folding probably 100% of his hands if Mark shoves, even 6s and 5s full, I would think, when Mark shoves from this position in this situation. So is Gerald going to call if Neil folds, more likely if I shove, or is Neil going to overcall if I call? And how do you figure that out?
Well, the first question is, what hands would Neil be overcalling with ultimately, right? I think it'd be a very strong range of hands. In this case, like we were asking on the podcast, is he actually going to overcall with queens here? It's not so obvious because Gerald's representing a stronger hand than he has when he bets 480K on the river, right? He's representing quads or a full house here, a strong full house, not the medium full house that he has. So that's really problematic as an overcall for Neil. I don't know that he's going to make this call with a hand even as strong as queens. It's close, I think. If that's the case, I don't know if there's enough calls in Neil that we shouldn't just move in when Gerald bets so much, where we have less than, that's more than half our stack. Let's just move in and hope he just closes his eyes and calls. Yeah, I think it's hard to get called either way. I think it's hard to make the extra chips either way, though.
It's very difficult, and it seems almost impossible. I think the best way to make more chips is if Neil has like aces or kings, he might feel like he just has to overcall. He might feel that way. Agreed. And Gerald might feel like he has to call if he has 6s full or 5s full if we shove. Combinatorially, Neil has more aces and kings than Gerald has 6s full and 5s full, but I think it might be a little more likely that Gerald actually calls with the 6s full and 5s full than Neil calls with the aces or kings. I'm not really sure. It's a super close spot. I don't think you could blame Mark for moving in. I don't think I would have blamed him if he flatted either.
Yep, I agree. I think both are okay for sure. Both are interesting. It's not obvious. You're rarely going to get paid off either way. I don't know, man.
I don't know. It's a tough spot. But, hey, you still get to win a huge pot. And, of course, Gerald now has a very easy decision to fold.
Yeah. Wow, there were so many marginal or tough decisions there, as we mentioned on the podcast. That's one of our longest podcasts we've ever done. We fought about at least 3 things where we got deep into the theory and practice of poker. where I'm like, he has to bet, and Grant's like, he has to check, and we really got into it and disagreed with each other a lot. What do you guys think about some of these decisions? It checking through on the flop. At least 3 players could have very reasonably bet that flop, for sure. On the river, what do you think about Gerald betting? We don't like it. Do you think it would work if Gerald bet smaller? It's a question. Should MacDonald move in or not and try and get the call instead from Neil Farrell on the river? Let us know in the comments what you think about all of these decisions. We'd love to hear what you have to say, as always.
Yeah, the thing that I would like to see the most, I think, in the comments, if you have a nuanced opinion on it, is a strong defense of Gerald's river bet, because I can't find a way that I like it. So I'm kind of curious about that. Also, you should check out that podcast that we talked about this in, because we do argue a lot. That's how we come to these conclusions. And man, it was a slog to get here, but in kind of a fun poker theory way, where we're really trying to figure out what's the best way, really putting our points out there, not always convincing each other. It's called the Breakdown Poker Podcast, presented by the Poker Guys. You should definitely check it out.